Hey, welcome back to church. We're so excited that you're here. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Hey, we've been doing an amazing thing with F's. Jason, how do you feel about the F series?
Oh, it's going awesome. It felt really good to be able to talk about the 5 F's that impact our life the most. And I think it's really cool that they all started with F. Like, I thought it was a very interesting,
Yeah,
just a really coul way to categorize kind of the things that happen in life, the ways that we move and interact, and the ways that we experience the world. To be able to give it 5 F's and kind of, I've been thinking about them more. Like, as we talked about them, now
yeah,
I've been thinking about the ways that those things impact me, or the ways that those things that I need to impact those things more.
yeah.
Right. So that's been a pretty cool reminder for me to lean into those things, especially the faith one. But then
Yeah.
when you think about all of them, it's just been really good to have a reminder that how important those things are, and how what a blessing it is to be able to get to lean into those things in our life. So it's been really cool. How about you? What do you
So
think
good.
so far?
Man, this has been an awesome just time recording these things. It's funny how they all started with F, right? I mean, when you're in school, you don't want F's, right? That's the
True,
exact
right,
opposite of what you
exactly.
want.
Yeah, yeah.
It's funny, we start off our podcast journey with a group of 5 F's, right? And so as I was thinking, it just came to me that there's one more F we got to do. You know,
Okay.
I feel like faith was just a big one. Fitness was good, finance, family, and friendship. But I feel like we left out failure. You know, so
Ooh. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
think we need
Okay.
to I think we need to tackle that topic because I think it's just something that's so relevant. And in the church, right? Just in general, right? In the church, failure can be seen as both good and bad, right? But
Hmm.
we often don't talk about it, right? We often kind of just like sweep it under the rug. We really don't address it. Sometimes we act like it doesn't happen, right? And then when it does happen, we act like it's something that we did wrong, right? And sometimes it can be something we did wrong, right? But we act like that the failure is equal to sin, and sometimes failure is not that. And so I think that's just a spot where we can just kind of hang our hat today and just have a conversation, and just hope that those you guys out there listening get something from this, because I believe that God really wants to speak through us, to us and to you about this topic. So, Jason, how do you feel about failure?
Oh, it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not fun to talk about. It caught me off guard when you mentioned it, that you want to talk about it. And not so much that I ever feel weird talking about anything. Always want to be real and authentic with people. But talking about failure is tough. Like, it's a
Yeah.
thing where, you've failed, but then to talk about it
Mm,
is to present it to the world, to kind
yeah.
of share that with friends. And so when I'm talking about it, not even on the podcast, but just talking intimately with your wife, or speaking directly to a friend, those kind of things. Like, when you fail in those ways and have to present it to the person that maybe you failed, or
Yeah.
when you have to look yourself in the mirror and acknowledge those things, that's one of the hardest things.
Yeah.
Especially for me, like, I tend to lean toward um, being a perfectionist, and being kind of focused on being excellent.
Yeah.
Maybe a little hard on myself. I want things to look good. I want things to be presented well. I want to say less on the podcast. Like, there's all these little
I
things
feel
that I
you.
notice that I do,
Yeah.
uh, that I really hope that they don't take away from my impact
Yeah.
in the areas of my life. Um, but I definitely have experienced a lot of grace from the failures that I had as a young man. Like, that's the first thing I thought of, was not necessarily, I think there are daily failures, right?
Hmm.
And like you mentioned before, there are positive failures. So you can be lifting weights, and it's called failure when you get to kind of the rep where you can no longer
Yeah.
lift the weight, right? But that doesn't mean you've actually failed the workout. It's just specifically a small failure, but there were big gains going on.
Yeah.
And so I think that is the best kind of failure. But there's also other kind of failures where my wife says something, I missed what she said, or I wasn't listening well, and then I don't do the thing. And so whatever it was, I have failed at meeting her expectation with that.
Yeah.
And she has a lot of grace for me. She has a lot of patience with me, but it's those areas, that's a small negative failure, but it's those areas that I just don't enjoy. Like, no, I don't think anybody really likes them, but I want us to be able to talk about them because it's so important to remind people that it doesn't define you. Because if my failures defined me, there would just be so much muck and mess that I couldn't get through.
Yeah.
There'd be this wall of kind of mud above me that I'd be drowning in or couldn't climb through. And God has just really redeemed, thankfully, all of my mistakes.
So
I mean,
good.
I can't think of any that I bear the burden for irreparably. Now, that isn't to say there's not worldly consequences, right? I think sometimes we do things and there are worldly consequences, but I think God can even redeem those and make it something special in people's lives. Like, I believe that there are people who are on in jail, on death row, maybe those kind of things. I mean, they're the worst kind of jail, that become Christians and can live their lives for other people.
Come on.
Even in those circumstances. So I think God can redeem any circumstance, but that doesn't mean that you don't get to bear the weight of those a little bit in this lifetime, right? Sometimes we do have to bear the weight of those things. And I think the interesting thing is mistakes, right? Mistakes that we make, those are kind of the failures, those kind of things. I think some mistakes become beautiful mistakes.
Come on.
Right. And I think that's really cool. So what do you think about that? Like, what can you think of, maybe times in your life, or what do you think about those beautiful mistakes?
Oh my goodness. You always drop some nuggets that I got to go back and talk about. You made a great analogy about like positive failures, right? Like, and I didn't really think about this, and you got my wheels turning about how, like, when you're lifting weights and you lift till failure, right? And how that can be positive because you're making gains, and failure is kind of like it's the proverbial stop, right? I just related to times in my life when I'm just going extra hard on something. I'm grinding, I'm trying to get it out, and all of a sudden my body gives out, or I get sick, or something just derails my extreme effort towards something. And just realizing that sometimes that's God's protection, right? Like, you go to failure when you're lifting weights because your body's trying to protect you from, they can't go anymore, right? If you keep going, you're going to tear a muscle, you're going to break something, right? So sometimes these positive failures in our life come to slow us down, right? They come to redirect our efforts, right? And so that just kind of hit me when you said that. I was like, wow, that is really, really good. And just touching on kind of just in the vein of where you were just kind of going, how there are consequences to failures. And you mentioned people in jail, right? And I have a heart for people in jail. In the military, I worked in a correction facility for 3 years. And through my educational journey, I learned, one of my professors said something that stuck with me. We did a whole lesson on this topic. It was, everybody's a criminal, right? And you could have, when she mentioned like the title of what she was going to teach, she kind of took the air out of the room, because some people were like, what are you talking about? Like, we're in higher education. She's like, hey, I want to say this topic and just think about it. She's like, everybody's a criminal. And most people were like, everybody?
They're thinking, not me. No,
they're thinking, not me. What are you talking about? I'm not a criminal.
Right.
And as she began to dissect and unpack this topic, she asked simple questions. She's like, for most of you who drove here, she's like, did you obey the speed limit completely to the T?
Oh, come on.
Right. And it was a convicting moment, because it was like, wait a minute. In some instances, you can't even obey the speed limit. It's like the traffic's going so fast that if you go the speed limit, you will cause more, you will mess up the flow. Right. And then she started asking little things. We're like, it's like, so the difference between people who are labeled criminals and people who are not is that the criminals get caught.
It's true.
And she was like, how many times in your life have you done something that was wrong, but no one ever knew about it?
That's right.
And it was just like, she was like, everybody's a criminal. And she brought up about how some people have sentences of 10, 20 years for just things that we normally do. They just got like caught, just something that happened to them. And so it's kind of like, hit me about how the grace of God protects us, and how those who have been covered by God's grace, how we turned a backhand to those who haven't been, those who've been exposed, right? And you're wondering like, oh, they're so bad. And you like realize we're all in the same bag. There's just people who have been caught up in that situation, and those we haven't, your life just hasn't got exposed yet. Right. And so I think about, my heart goes out to those who are in prison, because we serve a God of second chances. And no matter what you've done, where you've been, or what you've been involved in, there's nothing too hard for God to forgive, redeem you of, and restore you from. And so if you're listening to this today and you're like, failures, right? And you look at your life and it's defined by your failures, don't let it be, right? Today can be a day where you turn the corner on defining yourself, saying, I'm a criminal, I'm a liar, I'm a cheater. Whatever you've done, take that off of your name, right? And restore yourself back to the name that God has given you. He's called you blessed and highly favored, right? He died so that your sins can be forgiven. So today, live in that forgiveness and return to him. How do you do that? You repent of whatever mistake it was, right? That's the biggest thing about failures, is that you recognize them, right? That you recognize the lesson in the failure, right? So you don't repeat, right? This pattern of failures, right? And so that is the beautiful thing about God, is that when we come to him with our failures, with our sin, he is so just that he forgives us, right? He forgave us before we did it. And he helps us live a better life. He helps us move away from those things. And so that's what I think about when I think about failures. I think about the grace of God. I think about how some of the things that we've gone through, they make us better, right? They don't necessarily define us, right? They refine us, right? They make us more pure, right? If we take the lessons and we internalize them and we really apply them to our lives, they make us better. And so if you're looking for a faultless, failureless life, we're here to tell you today, real people with real problems who really love God, there's no such thing. Right. And so
That's right.
That's kind of like, that's kind of like where I'm kind of standing on that failure thing, that I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be perfect. And Jason, you mentioned this. And sometimes we go too far in this seek of perfection, where we kind of, when we do make a failure, it's an epic crash down of our whole self-esteem. Or shame is one of the things that really keep people away from God, right? I'm not good enough. Or when I get my life together, then I'll start, having a relationship with God. It's not how it works, right? God is able, and he is waiting for you today, right now, just the way you are. He loves you and he sees where you are. And so, Jason, tell me in your life, right? Just something practical that kind of helped you turn the corner, but how you viewed yourself. I see you as a person who's probably never really struggled with self-esteem. But I know that's not true, right? And so I believe that failures and shortcomings in life, they can really affect how we see ourselves. And I believe we live in a world where people are really struggling with the dark, behind closed doors things of their life that define them. So can you kind of just like unpack a little bit of how you have walked through this life and you maintain such a positive, confident, that's just who you are. But how do you maintain that, knowing that you've experienced failures before in your life?
So for me, outwardly, like you said, I've always felt like I have good self-confidence, good self-esteem. It's not something I've had to like work to build up or avoid thinking about my failures, because for me, and maybe this is just a special gift that God has given me through my personality or something, but to me, the two were never deeply connected. So the failures I would have for myself, for instance, like going from somebody who I thought was really athletic to gaining a bunch of weight, right? There's always kind of this protection that I have from my self-confidence that's a little bit dangerous. Like that's kind of where I wanted to go with this was
Come
I
on.
was almost too confident as I was gaining weight. I wasn't paying attention to what was happening in the mirror because my self-image was staying positive. So as much as I think people can struggle with depression or dark thoughts when they're in a good place, it was a really interesting juxtaposition because sometimes I struggle with too many positive thoughts about myself, too much self-indulgence, right?
Yeah.
When I was going through negative things. So I was kind of masking those things. In fact, I can think specifically of an example where in graduate school, a bunch of us guys were like, let's grow beards. Like we're going through these academic struggles together. Let's do something that we can all do together.
Yeah.
So I grew out this big beard, but upon reflection, like you'll notice today, I have kind of like a stubble look. I'm not really, I don't grow big beards. Typically, when I grow beards, I realize it's to cover up like a double chin. Or when I'm feeling heavy, it's something I can do aesthetically to draw attention away from the fact that I'm heavy. Right. And at least that's what I think of it as. I think of it as being this kind of like covering.
Yeah.
I've heard it said that beards are a man's best makeup, you know, like they are mascara, they are foundation for us. But in all seriousness, the growing of a beard was something I kind of did as like a cover. Like I didn't want to acknowledge the one struggle. So I went with something aesthetically different that made me what I thought visually interesting to people, right? Without having to focus on my physical health. And it made me more attractive because I was covering. And I think that's what happens a lot of times is people cover. So there's a struggle or a failure happening and you're in the midst of failure, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes constant struggles can feel like failings, depending on how you're kind of receiving them. And so for me, that was like a consistent failing that I was trying to cover up with this cool thing. Like I still like beards. I'm sure I'll grow a beard again someday, but I had to get to a place where I realized the things I was doing to cover up. Right.
Got it.
Another failing, like we talked about this in the fitness episode, but another big failing of mine was like private eating. So, and not just private eating, but private, terrible eating, like junk food eating, knowing that it was bad for me. And in a really, practical sense, I would even like speed eat. You know, I didn't want to get caught eating cookies. So I'd go ahead and eat 2 or 3 really quick. So it's not like I was sitting enjoying them because what I was nervous about was the failure I would feel when someone called me out for this thing that I knew was obviously wrong. That I knew was obviously unhealthy. So sometimes I think we do that too. We blow past failure so we can cover them up. We also try to blow past them. Right. And so what I've had to do is get to kind of the third layer where hopefully, and I hopefully keep getting better at this. I'll never be perfect at it, but now just acknowledge them. Like early in my marriage, wasn't great at listening, right? Wasn't doing the things my wife needed from me. She was telling me, you know, hey, we got a bunch of kids now. I need your help doing dishes. Okay, babe, I'll get to it. And maybe I was just saying something to satisfy her, but I was really failing her. So kind of the third layer now is realizing both having grace for people that are failing, because I think sometimes we don't, when we're failing, we also don't have grace for those failures. So it becomes like this weird double-edged sword where you're struggling with your failure, but you're also struggling with frustration over maybe someone else's failure, and it just spirals. So what I had to do was stop, get God back at the center of all these things. Like, God, I'm going to get more fit to be a better representative for you and for my family. As a better example, God, I'm going to take maybe my finances. I'm going to take the ways I'm failing and not tithing, because there wasn't always a tithe happening in our household. Right. There was excuses being made. There were gaps in our finances where I didn't want to acknowledge that we're eating too much fast food when we could eat at home. Because again, that food addiction, I was like, I love this. I need this hit of dopamine or whatever I'm getting. So there was ways I was failing like that. And then going back even further, I think there were times in high school, throughout my life, middle school, where, you know, lie, cheat, and steal, right? I'd lie to my parents about something.
Yeah.
I would try to cheat on tests. I would steal money or food or whatever. I mean, little things where like you make excuses for it.
Come on.
But it's not a pattern you want to build up. So if you look at the ways, and I think everybody does it, the ways that you lie, cheat, and steal, if you can acknowledge the ways that you bear the weight of those things and that the ways that failure happens in your life because of those things. So I don't want to lie to myself. I don't want to lie to other people. I don't want to cheat myself or cheat other people. And I don't want to steal from myself or other people. So that's how, I guess I would lay out failure that way. Look at the ways you're lying to yourself or others, cheating yourself or others, stealing from yourself or others. Because by the way, when you're eating unhealthy, you're stealing time from yourself, right? When you're not tithing, you're stealing God's blessing on your money.
Come on.
Right? I mean, there's just ways that we are continually lie, cheat, and steal. And I think that's a sinful world. I think we're all there. And this is not throwing shame or judgment upon anyone because I am the worst of these, right? Paul talked about that very thing in the Bible is, you know, of the sinners, I'm chief. Yeah. And so I want to take that on as well. And it took me a lot of years and a lot of maturity to get there and say, am I willing to acknowledge that I'm that? Yeah. And still feel like I can talk to other people about God or still share my faith or still encourage other people not to do the things while admitting I did them. Because I think what the world would teach you is if you admit you did something, then you're not allowed to talk about it. Right? Cover it up. You can't talk about the ways you failed at avoiding drugs, alcohol, pornography, theft, whatever the thing is, right? Gluttony or whatever you're dealing with. Yeah. You can't talk about it if you're failing at it. That's a lie. That is the lie that Satan tells us, is you can't talk about it if you're failing at it, when actually you might be a subject expert on that. And somebody is going to grow from that. So I mentioned it in the fitness episode briefly, and then I'll pass the mic to you and let you kind of dig into all this. But I mentioned it briefly that I went from about 180 pounds to 320. And then I dropped back down, got down to 200. And so losing 120 pounds, I used to quickly say thank you if people would acknowledge it, like you've done great, but I would never really talk about it. And my wife challenged me one day, why do you quickly move past it? And I'm like, well, because it's embarrassing and it's also a failure. So I'd rather people take on the kind of take on the example I have now. I don't want them taking on the example I had. But she said, yeah, but there are a lot of people struggling. And if they know somebody can do it, maybe they can too. So let me say this today to encourage people listening. If you're failing at anything, maybe you're the subject expert at failing at that thing. And even while you fail in it, you can encourage other people. Right? Even while you are letting someone down in that area, you can encourage someone else. Hey, I know what it feels like to let someone down in that area. Let me tell you, you don't want to do that. So that's, you know, what's funny? That's what parenting advice is for me. Like, these are the ways that I have failed, and these are a few ways I've succeeded. And here's the ways I've failed. And if you can avoid these, you will be a better parent than I am. Wow. You know, like that turns into, the negative things you do turn into positive pieces of advice. Yeah. So if you can think of failure that way, you can really turn it on its head. And so you talked about right at the beginning, my self-confidence. I think that's where I've gotten to, is I can move and operate in freedom that God has forgiven me for those things. And maybe now it's made me a subject expert on these things in the ways that you can fail at it. It's not necessarily the expert that you want to be, but it's what God allows you to be through freedom, through grace. So good. I'm thankful for that. Anyway, I'll kick it back to you. I don't want to soapbox on this thing too long, but those are just some of the ways that I feel like I process failure now in a healthy way. I think there's unhealthy and healthy ways to process it. And I think failure is totally cool. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I also want to get back to creative failure. Yeah. Like that's kind of a big thing. But what about you? What has failure done for you in terms of helping lead other people? Ooh. Right. Like how has that kind of helped you platform a little bit? So when I think about when I apply the failure piece to my life, when I was 25, I had a diagnosis that happened, and it was totally unexpected.
I joined the Navy when I was 18. I was a pretty fit guy, played football, um, and went in the Navy. Never had any problem with all the physical stuff, like the running, the push-ups and all this stuff. But when you join the military, running becomes different. Running becomes just a part of your culture, right? And so I would always, when you run in the military, most of the times in formation, which means just a lot of people at one time, like lined up, like you would expect in the military, right? They have what you call a cadence caller, and this person would sing a song and keep everybody like on the same pace. And the thing about it is if you sing the song that they're singing, the cadence, whatever, it takes your mind off of what you're actually doing. It helps you breathe and all these other things. I would always levitate to being the cadence caller. That was me. That was, I'm not, I'm a great cadence caller. That's all day, every day cadence caller.
Yeah. I can see that.
And, and one thing I would find out is when I wasn't calling cadence, right, I would, on a long run, I would struggle. And I'd be like, well, I guess I'm supposed to be the cadence caller. I mean, I would just struggle getting my win. But when I was leading other people, because the cadence caller sings or says the first part of it and everybody else repeats it. So you're leading the group, as you're running. And when I wasn't doing that, I would have some struggles, and I just push through and just wouldn't, and then around about 25, I remember significantly, I had a really hard time. I went to a school where it was, the running was different, wasn't cadence. It was just like, it was long runs. And I just couldn't get my win. I went to the doctor and I found out that I had asthma. And the doctor was like, you've had asthma probably your whole life. You've never recognized this. You've never felt winded. You've never felt like you couldn't breathe while and I was like, and I had to think back and be like, yeah, I've felt that way. I've struggled before, like running, like that, I had the muscle strength, but I didn't have the wind strength. But what I did was I just go and call cadence, right? And then force myself to not think about what I was going through. And I think often we do that with problems in our life. We mask the problem, right, by calling cadence on something, right? We ignore the failure and we find another way to make ourselves look better and be better, right? Because everybody knows the person called in cadence is the top runner because they're leading the group, right? They're leading the songs, right? So they look really good, but nobody really knows on the inside that they're struggling, right? That if they were removed from their position of leadership, that they couldn't even breathe, right? That they would be in the back of the group, right? And I believe for some of us that there's areas in our life that if we were not in positions where we were exalted or positions where we are above everybody else, that people would actually see us for the deficits that we do have, right? And so you have to be very, very keen on the places in your life where you're like, hey, I know I have this problem. No one else knows it, but if I just keep leading, if I just keep showing up and putting on a good face and faking it, I'll get past it. I encourage you today, like there could be something seriously derailing the prosperity and future of your life if you ignore it, right? Like if you're the person who is real strong at church and real strong Christian, but when you're alone in your home, there's things that come on your cell phone that shouldn't. You're probably calling cadence, right? If you're the person to everybody, they think everything's good to go, but in your finances, things are like falling apart. You're probably calling cadence. And, I hate to be like, hey, he's calling me out on some of these things. If you're the person who your thought life is not good and no one else knows your thoughts but you and God, but everybody thinks that, you have the greatest advice, you have it all together. Don't ignore those little things. I did for some periods in my life. I'm guilty of the things I'm talking about, right? And so you have to go to the doctor, which is Jesus, and address the failure, right? So you can get the help. And so I've learned that I still can run. I can go, right? But I also know that I probably need a rescue inhaler with me, right? I know that I have some limitations out there, right? And these things keep me safe, right? And I believe in our life sometimes we don't know our boundaries. We don't know how far we can go, and we often don't take the help that we need along the journey, right? We think we can handle it. And as men, we think we can have, I got this, right? But failure sometimes helps us slow down and redirect our effort back to what God really wants for our life. We don't have to carry it all on our own, and we don't have to be everything to everybody, right? We can admit we're not as strong. We're weak at certain points, and when we address these weaknesses, addressing them makes us stronger and better. And so I encourage people to lean into getting help, lean into not being perfect, right? If you look at your life right now and be like, I can't tell you one weakness. Hey, talk to the people around you and just kind of see, like, get some feedback into that, right? So for me in my life, it's being able to admit that I'm not the strongest person in the room, right? To be able to admit that I'm not, that I don't have it all together, and I do need help. I do need advice. That's just kind of been like this march away from perfection and this march back to the heart of God, right? It's helped me be more humble in places where I thought I had locked in, right? And so the facade, taking off the facade and being the real me, right? And I love this. I heard this years ago, so it ain't mine. The blessing of God is on the real you, not the you that you show everybody, right? And what that simply means is God's going to bless the authentic you, the flawed, the need help, the person who struggles. God's going to bless that person. He's not going to bless this perfect facade that you've shown the world. And so encourage yourself to not live in I'm weak, I can't do it, because God has not given us a spirit of fear or timidity, but live in the authentic you that is not perfect. Embrace a world with flaws and mistakes, right? Embrace a world where you don't get everything right, because that is where God does his greatest work, right? That's where he shows up. And so acknowledging, addressing, and getting help for the things that we fail at, that strengthens our life, right? And sometimes we have to step back from what we're doing in order to see our blind spots and to see the deficits that we have. And so I just kind of wanted to, just kind of bring that to the forefront of like what failure kind of really means. It helps identify the deficits in our life. And being 44 years old, I am blessed to know that I have asthma. I still got it, right? It's something that I live with. It doesn't stop me from doing anything I want to do. But when I go to do something, I take in consideration, this is a part of me, right? And as I'm continued playing for healing, and there's been years where I haven't had any asthma episodes and everything, and then it'll pop up. But guess what? I know what it is, right? And I know how to address it, right? It's not a failure of, oh, I'm weak. It's a thing of, oh, this is a part of me. And so for some of us, men and women, there's going to be things in your life that you're subject to, like the things that in your life that will get you off your walk with Christ. They're going to be things that they're going to be places you can't go. It's a thing for you, right? And so you must know these particular things, moral failures, things that you're just subject to, right? That you've prayed, God's healed me from this. Yep. So if you were alcoholic, then you probably shouldn't be going to the liquor store. Not even if you're going to get bubble gum, right? Just stay away from the temptation, right? Like I am a recovering Krispy Kreme addict. Okay. Right. I head up the support group, right? Legitimately nothing wrong with Krispy Kreme. They're so good. That's why I'm a recovering addict. Right. I know that's not good for my life. So the hot sign, no, keep it going. Right. So there's just things, you don't want to touch because you're aware that this is a weak point in your life. And so you don't want to test those things. Right. If you want to continue to push forward and be successful and stay away from those. So learning from your failures, I think that's a big piece that
it's
a lot
huge.
of people need.
Yeah. So the two things I thought of while you were talking was, and it's just kind of a condensing of what you were saying, was acknowledgement and then accountability.
Come on.
Like those are the two ways to tackle failure. The ways to confront it head on and kind of be a warrior against it is acknowledge that it's going on and then find accountability in that process of battling that thing.
Yep.
Because I think it's great to acknowledge it and I think it's great to have accountability, but acknowledging something without having accountability means that you'll give yourself time to make excuses for it.
Yeah.
So I can acknowledge that, like, you would mention you struggle with the Krispy Kreme. You can acknowledge it and continue eating them. Right.
True.
And you could have accountability. You could have someone in your life, let's say no acknowledgement, but with accountability, you could have someone in your life that's saying, hey, don't eat the Krispy Kreme. You say, I hear you.
Yep.
Like you start eating them again. To me, that's the key is you have to continuously acknowledge it. You can't just acknowledge it for a moment and then start ignoring it again, because that's when it'll creep up. So for me, for the rest of my life, my diet and kind of my activity level, I would say working out, but really just staying active too. Like there's days where you're not going to get a full workout in. Go for a walk, make sure you're lifting firewood and putting it up on the stack, anything you can do to be moving your body. In fact, my wife and I buy 2-story homes because of that. Because she read a story early on where it was like, if you have stairs,
come on,
you actually will live longer.
Come on.
Right? And we have our bedroom upstairs, not down.
Come on.
That's the thing is like, if you have to always be up and down the stairs, the odds that you let your body just kind of wither is lower as you get to an older age. So we acknowledge that fitness is a challenge.
Yeah.
And we're accountable to it by having to go up and down the stairs all the time.
Ooh.
So I think it's a kind of a really cool moment to think about how can you acknowledge it continuously, whatever you're struggling with, and set up accountability that you can't avoid. So that's kind of the key is in a 2-story house, we can't avoid going upstairs to sleep. Occasionally you can crash out on the couch, but most of the time you're going to go upstairs to sleep.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good point too, is occasionally you are going to crash on the couch. Occasionally you are going to fail at whatever it is that you've acknowledged and have accountability on again. But that's what the accountability is for, is to say, this isn't going to become a pattern of slipping. Yeah. This is going to be one slip and then we're going to start again. We're going to start fresh. And I think that's what God is the best at. You pray about those things, you acknowledge it, you give it to him, and he says, I got it. I'm bearing the burden of this. You go be awesome.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of people see God as this kind of judgmental figure that will levy a heavy price on whatever failures you have. But the truth is, he sent Jesus to die for it.
Yep.
And so Jesus took it. It's gone already. And so sometimes that's even a challenge to think those things through, is like, as people, I don't know if you've ever met somebody like this, Warren, but there are people who want the burden of failure because it helps define them. Like they would say they don't want the drama of it, but they keep it. They want the dramatic storytelling of their life to be they've failed. They want the definition of their life because without it, they'd have to acknowledge it and search for the next thing. They'd have to search for Jesus. They'd have to search for positivity. And I have met a few people in my life, and I always kind of have a heart burden for those people. It hurts me to see them living in definition by the failure that they've gone through, that they experience, that maybe they constantly put on themselves, right? To say you're an alcoholic, to say you're a jealous person, to say somebody's hurt you is one thing, but to never let those things go is something very different. And I think a lot of times, as much as this episode is about, let's look at failure and maybe give people some keys or tools to like start that journey against failure, because it's a lifelong journey.
Yep.
I would also encourage the people that maybe have this lifestyle where their failure defines them and they kind of need it to define them. Take a super hard look at that.
Yeah.
Because I think you're limiting the relationships in your life. You're limiting the potential of your life. You're limiting the blessings your life could have for other people by not developing a sense of definition
Yeah.
comes from God.
There you
Definition doesn't come from the things you failed at. In fact, why don't you define yourself by the ways God has saved you from that thing? I think that would be the next layer.
Yeah.
That would be the next battle is, there's going to be people who failed that acknowledge it and then they work on it. There's going to be people that failed. They have accountability, but they never acknowledged it. The people who really succeed, they have acknowledgement and accountability, but you got to accept both of those things first.
Yep.
Don't live by defining your life by the failures, because it's not true, by the way.
Yeah.
That's just, and if I may, I don't mean to be like harping on this too much or beating anybody up, but that's a really self-centered way to live. To live as though your failures define who you are as a person, even though someone else created you.
Come on.
And then you slipped up and failed.
That was
you
good.
Did something, no matter how bad it is, right? No matter how bad it is.
Yeah.
God created you. You didn't create you.
He didn't create you.
So then to look at him and say, you did a bad job with this.
Ooh.
I'm just not willing to go there.
Wow.
There's no part of me that would ever say God did a bad job with this.
Ouch.
Maybe I have not been a good steward of what God created.
Yeah.
But if you're listening to this today, hear me when I say it, you are a miracle.
Come on.
God created you. Like, just looking at DNA strands, just looking at the ways people are put together, it is impossible. You're a mistake. If you feel like you're a mistake, go get your DNA studied. Just the DNA, right? Just the computer code that is in your body to make things function. Just go look at it.
Yeah.
It is impossible that you're a mistake.
Come on.
So I just want to say that. I feel like somebody need to hear that today.
Ooh,
you're not a mistake, and your failure doesn't define you. And let's get past it. Let's move on. Let's do something bigger and better than dwelling on the failure.
Wow, that was strong.
Now you get to follow that up, boy.
That was good. That was good.
Warren has to follow that up. Hey, everybody listening.
Wow. I mean,
that's tough.
I mean,
you might have to. That's it. That's the mic drop. I'm just kidding. We're not going to stop.
You know, I'm a science geek, right? So,
I know,
so when you start talking about DNA, right, man, this is one thing I really enjoy about science. Science is explaining stuff, right? But it can't recreate it. It's so amazing how complicated just you are. Just everything about your cells, your DNA, how God put us together, how the neurons, how everything works in concert to create you, and to think that you are a failure. Like, did you know how God knit you together, how he perfectly designed you, set so that you have two eyes, but you see one thing? You know what I'm saying? You have two ears, but you hear one. It's one sound that goes in. It's amazing just how everything operates. I love this part. Failure is not final. You know,
that's right.
I've heard that so many times in my life, but I've lived that whatever you're going through, whatever has happened in your life, and like Jason said, maybe it defines who you are, right? And maybe you need that. Your failure is not final. It's if you are still here living and breathing, whatever it is that happened to you, right? That's not the final chapter of your life. God's still writing your story, and you're a co-author in it, right? And so that means you hold the responsibility of living the best life you can for the God who created you. And when we get down to the nitty-gritty of what we are here for, we're here to bring God glory, right? And when we think about our lives and all of the blessings that God has given us, we have a responsibility, right, to not only show people the love of God, but be the love of God for people, right? Not just put a show on for them, but actually be that thing that we're talking about, right? And a part of being that is sharing the things that God has brought you through. We touched on this early in the podcast, but we can't hide the things that we have that we're struggle with. We can't hide it. Like, if there are people out there going through things and God is walking them through it, you're qualified to talk about it. You got a PhD in this situation, right? Like, look, I keep messing up at this. I keep messing up at this. And guess what? I'm still here coming back to the feet of God, and he is helping create an environment where I can overcome this, right? But this is the thing that we have to talk about as the church in general, right? And not be like, we are holy and righteous. Yes, that's what we're called to. But let's just be honest. If the leaders of the church can just be a little real about what they're going through, I think the people of God can be more comfortable knowing, okay, we're all in this together. It's not you up here and me down here, right? God has called us to be holy and righteous. In that process, he's provided forgiveness, repentance, and a lot of us are on this continual journey of falling at the feet of Jesus every morning, right? It's when we get to the point of, no, you're bad and I'm good. It's when we push people away from the love of God.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we all have failed and fallen short of the glory of God.
And let me key on that. Hold on. So I think that's really good. I would rather have a leader of any kind that has failed at something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would rather have a leader that knows what I'm going through, knows the struggle, and then can give me advice along those terms. That can point me to the things that help them, because I think lived experience is the best teacher.
Yeah.
Like if you can use your lived experience and help other people, that's the kind of leader I want. So that's the kind of leader that I hope to be, that I work to be. Is I'd rather share the things that both are really good in my life that I have experience with, and really bad and really hard in my life that I have experience with.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes if you take those things out of it, in any kind of leadership, work environment, if you pretend like you always got along with that boss now that you work directly for them because you got promoted, then the people below you that are working, that just kind of started up and are going through their career, they're going to recognize that you're just being a yes man, right? They're going to recognize that, like, well, or maybe you're just not a good judge of character. If you're pretending like you always got along with this person that no one else gets along with, either you better give them the kind of secret to that Rubik's Cube, or they're just going to go, well, why are you lying to us?
Yeah.
Why are you pretending like this person's great? Because they paid you more? So the kind of leader that you want to be in whatever environment you're in is, for me, I would rather be the kind of guy that is honest and respectful than just goes along with everything.
Yeah.
Because I think being honest and respectful helps other leaders that you work for avoid failure too. Because if you just say what people want to hear, whether it's, so if someone you lead in terms of a friend that's seeking out advice, a boss that's asking you a question, whatever it is, honesty is going to be the best policy.
Absolutely.
And I know that's like a really trite, very rote thing to say, like everybody's heard it before. But the reason honesty is the best policy is because you never have to go back and cover up for an honest thing you said.
Come on.
You never have to go back and say, well, actually what I really meant was this. No, I told you what I meant. Now, people will receive it or not. But in terms of failure specifically, you can lead a lot of people to failure by pretending that things are okay, by pretending that you don't feel a certain way, because they'll never know the ways they could improve if you don't bring that lived experience. So I want a leader who's like, hey guys, I tried this 10 times and I failed at it every time, but I've learned enough that I think this time on number 11, we're going to do it.
We're going to do it.
And here's why. And they can even explain to you why, because they can go through all the things that kind of jam them up. And I think real leaders, I think real people that are really helping other people, that's how I'm defining leader in this case, by the way.
Come on.
Is if you're just being a real person helping someone else, you are leading them in something. I think being as real as possible and sharing your life can only benefit.
Come on.
Right? And for those people that are listening saying like, well, what if it turns into gossip? What if my reputation gets hurt? Well, you just found out how healthy the environment that you're in really is.
Come on.
Or how unhealthy it is. And if it's unhealthy, you then have to acknowledge that and figure out what you're going to do next. But if you can't be real where you're at, if you can't bring your lived experience and find value there, then there may be something else that's not healthy. So ironically, it's another opportunity to learn from failure. Now, I want to say this too, no matter what environment you're in, if you feel like they're not taking in the kind of speciality that you have in that area, or they're not accepting the knowledge you have, they're not listening, you feel like you're not bringing anything to the table, that doesn't mean abandon that thing. Maybe God has you there for that reason, so that maybe you can open up doors for people.
Come on.
That are around you. You can help change minds. You can help influence in positive ways the things that you see that maybe are failing in the environment around you.
Yeah.
So don't just run, because there's no organization. There is no friendship. There is no relationship on planet Earth that's perfect. There's not one. I have yet to find one. I have yet to see an example of one other than God's relationship, Jesus's relationship to us.
Come on.
He was perfect for us, to us. But other than that, we're all going to mess up. We're all going to come up short. There will be failure. So it's a chance to grow from those things. What's the whole point of what I'm saying? Take the failures in your life, help other people grow from them.
Let's go.
But even if it's not helping other people, maintain your honesty about those things.
Yeah.
So eventually you will find a group or a culture or an area, a relationship that it's going to help. But if you're dishonest about it, people aren't going to recognize it. They're not going to see that, or they're just going to think, well, that's another person I can't talk to about this thing. So what I'd rather be is the person somebody can hopefully talk to and share with, rather than just another person they can't talk to. So you get to decide who you want to be today, guys, for the people around you. So now it's on you guys. Who do you want to be? Do you want to be somebody that helps somebody through failure or not?
Wow.
Because that's kind of it, by the way. That's what we're doing. That's what relationships, I think, are about, is building each other up, adding to each other's lives. But the worst part of relationships that really add something to your life is they can also take away from. They can also detract, depending on the choices people make. And I think that's the challenge of relationship, is people will fail you. And that is totally okay, because none of us are perfect. It's about forgiveness. It's about continual growth. And I'm not saying I hope people fail you, but as Warren and I maintain our friendship over a lifetime, there will be a moment where I will fail him. And I'd like to acknowledge that now on the pod, that I don't want that to happen, but there will come some moment, right? Whether it's small or large, or something happens where it may not even be something that I need to forgive. It may not be something that I need to ask forgiveness for, but we will fail each other in some way, right? You'll miss a text. You'll miss a call. You'll say the wrong thing. You'll do the wrong thing. But the key is nobody's perfect. And so when you fail that person, acknowledge it, ask for forgiveness, build the relationship back up. And I think it makes relationships even stronger. If you can both acknowledge, like, hey man, we're not perfect. I shouldn't have said that thing. I shouldn't have asked about that thing when it wasn't my business, and trying to gossip or whatever. I don't know what it turns into for different people, right? And I'm not sure what ways that I will fail my wife, my kids, the people closest to me, but it's going to happen. And I'm not saying that to make excuses for it. I'm saying that to say, because I know it's going to happen, I'm going to be super ready to ask for forgiveness. I'm going to throw my pride away and replace it with humility. Because when the time comes, I also want to be the guy that, as much as I want to be acknowledged and I want to be able to share my failures and wisdom, I also want to be the guy who's very quick to ask for forgiveness and say, this was my fault. I was the issue. I'm the problem. It's me. You know, I couldn't avoid it. Anyway. So yeah,
I know where you went there.
Whatever the issue is, I want to be the first one to say I'm sorry, hopefully. And I know I'm not always, by the way. I still have a lot of pride. I love me some me, and that's just going to be a challenge forever. So I think that's something to work through and towards. And but you can do it, guys. Everybody can do it. Everybody can have healthy relationships. It's just going to take acknowledgement that all of us are going to come up short at some point, at some level, in some level of intensity. So I love you guys. I hope y'all hear what I'm saying. And none of you are failures, but we will fail.
We will fail.
None of us are failures, but we will fail.
That's right. The act of failing doesn't mean you are a failure.
Yeah, I was going to say, you are a great example of someone I've heard give advice, someone I've heard be able to build other people up. And I just want to say thanks for being who you are about that, because you have taken some of the failures of your life and you run into them head on, and then encourage other people to be better just by saying, like, it's okay not to be perfect.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that about you, man. I just want to say that.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you, sir.
It's just a little bro love on the pod. No big deal.
Little
No
bro
big
love
deal.
on the
This is what the people
podcast.
really came for. They wanted just us to just talk to each other.
I feel
So,
you.
anyway,
I got this small story of a failure that really set the temperature of my life. When I was in second grade, I brought my report card home to my dad. This is when they actually gave report cards to kids.
Sure, yeah.
To bring to their
paper
parents.
handouts, handwritten. Yeah.
And my dad was an amazing man. I mean, my life hero, phenomenal guy. But he didn't play when it came to education, right? He wouldn't discipline you for getting bad grades. He would discipline you for not doing your best. And I couldn't figure out which one that was, because I'm like, because your best was not a C. And so I brought my report card home and I had a C on there. And he looked at me and he said, Dion, if you bring me another C, I'm going to give you the whooping of your life. And I was on notice. I was like, oh, man. Whoa. Okay. And so for the next 6 weeks, it's a report card period back in the day. I tried my hardest. I was not going to bring him another C. I was convinced. I worked. I did all my work. I didn't skip anything. I remember consciously like focusing on, report card day, not bringing him another C. And 6 weeks later, I got a report card, and I looked at the report card and I was shocked because I tried my hardest, and I looked at it and it was not only a C on there. There were D's and F's. I was like, I'm dead. I'm a dead man walking. And so I remember taking him that report card and handing it to him. And I handed it to him and he asked me, he was like, what happened? And I was like, I don't know, Dad. I tried. And I mean, he was a man of his word. I got the whooping of a lifetime. I remember it was bad. It was totally bad.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, after the whooping, you know how you get talked to before the whooping, then you get the whooping and you're just like, and most people can't relate, right? But then he was looking at the report card and it wasn't my name on the report card. It wasn't mine.
Oh no.
Right? And so he was like, Dion, this is not your report card. And he took me out to the truck and we drove to this house because I guess the report card had your name and your address and everything. He went to the address of the person the report card belonged to, knocked on the door, and I stayed in the truck. I'm still, significant thing had just happened in my life. He comes back to the truck with this report card. And I remember him looking at it and his head just sunk down. And he said, I'm sorry. I mean, I'd never seen my dad cry before. And he said, I'm sorry. You got straight A's and I disciplined you for no reason. And I remember him just sitting there crying.
Man.
And I was like, for me, I was just like, what just happened? It didn't matter that I had gotten a whooping, but I saw like my leader take full accountability for what had happened and really be upset about what happened. And as I got older and that story never left me, I learned that when we make mistakes, when we sin, when we fail, right? And God sees us, everything that we do, when we're really repenting of what's wrong, what we've done, we come to him and we say, God, I'm sorry. I messed this up. And it's not like forgive me so I can go on by my happy way and feel good about myself. It's like I let God down. And I had a first row seat to a practical thing that happened with my dad. And granted, you know, I got the physical manifestation of it, but something way greater than the discipline I got to see real failure, real repentance. I mean, because I don't think he ever made that mistake again. Right.
Yeah.
But also when I told him I tried my best, he never doubted me again. And I think that's what we all should strive for in our lives, that when we fail in whoever we fail, when we repent to God, when we repent to our spouses or our children, because we will make mistakes, right? It's the really turning from the mistake, learning from the mistake, right? And doing our best to make it right. And using that piece, right, to make a difference in the world. Who knew that had happened so many years ago would be broadcast for the world to share in a piece of that story, right? My dad did that. He lived that, and today that is living forward to help people. I don't know who that's going to help today, right? But that's what our failures do. They help other people understand that, hey, it's okay. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to get it wrong, right? But God is there to forgive us, and we can move forward knowing that there is redemptive power in God, right? And that he can make us whole again, right? He can make us completely whole again. And so failure is not final. Keep pushing through the things in your life that may have fallen apart that you're like, oh my God, it's okay. There is hope in Jesus for your life. That failure, he will take that pain and he will use it for his good. You are good. So never stop being good. And don't define yourself with what the failure says you are. You are more than the breakup that happened in your life. You're more than that job that let you go. You're more than the degree you didn't get. You're more than the job that fired you or the people who walked away from your life. You're more than the crime you committed. You are put together and made by God. The Bible says that you're his masterpiece. He didn't say you're his flawed failure. He says you're his masterpiece, right? He sent his only son to die for your sins. You are worth it. You are priceless. There's nothing like you. And so today, if you see yourself through the mirror of failures, stop it. It's a lie, because we often remember the worst and we don't remember the best. So today, remember the best of what God created in you and be the best in what God created you. Jason, thank you for allowing us to talk about this today. I think that we've hit on some points that are like tough, but I think it's real good for life. I mean, I've been helped by things you've talked about today, and I know that there's some people who are listening that this is going to be some life-changing stuff. So I just pray that this goes out into the world and that God uses it for his glory, and that people who have been defining themselves by their failures know they don't have to accept that anymore. So good.
Yeah. That's a wrap on that. Like that. No more thinking that your failure is you.
Come on.
It's just something you did.
Yeah.
And God took care of it.
Absolutely.
Ask him to come in there and clean things up. It's awesome. Hey man, I'm going to pray us out.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you for sharing your stories as well.
I appreciate you, man.
God, I just thank you for today's episode. I thank you for the chance to talk about failure. I thank you for you coming into my life and taking the failure away, and not having it define me, not having it be a permanent mark on my life. I thank you for bearing the burden of all of my failures and allowing me to share you with other people, maybe through some of those things. I thank you for blessing all of us with peace and grace. And I pray that whoever needs to hear this episode would hear it. Whoever needs to know they're not a failure, they've just failed a few times and you're going to take care of it. I pray they would hear this episode and know that it's true. Thank you for the opportunity to have church with Warren. I thank you for his life. I pray you just keep blessing us both and everybody that's listening now. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, bro.
Love you, man.
I'll talk to you soon,
Yes,
buddy.
sir.
Can't wait for another one.
Woo-hoo.
That's church.